Intelligence, creativity, consciousness, all of the things that we believe make us uniquely human. But is there a fundamental difference between man and machine? Could AI be conscious? For example, could a future version of ChatGPT, such as ChatGPT 12, be conscious? The surprising answer for my guest today is yes.
Yes. So, in terms of fundamental differences, yes, I don't think there's anything that suggests it's fundamentally impossible for an artificial system to be conscious, especially because we know so little about what's required for consciousness, and that's what makes a lot of people nervous. It's like how we're these technologies are advancing, but if we don't know exactly what is required for a system to be conscious, we might be creating conscious systems now.
Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Your engagement is what makes these podcasts possible. We have several really exciting episodes coming up on topics such as AI safety, autonomous AI agents, and AI and pizza.
This is the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast with your host, Stephen Walther, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show. I am super excited to have Marta Halina here today, and thank you for being here. And I want to start by giving a brief intro. Marta Halina is a professor of philosophy at the University of Cambridge. Halina's research focuses on non-human animal cognition, mechanistic explanation, and artificial intelligence. Wow. Lots of exciting stuff to cover. I'm really interested. I'm super happy that you were able to join us because I'm super interested in sort of like trying to understand how ChatGPT thinking or artificial intelligence thinking relates to animal thinking, human thinking. And I love that your research covers all of that. I love that there's such overlap. And I guess I just wanted to start. I mean, you're a philosopher, so I'm going to throw a giant philosophical question at you, but start with the question of, do you think that there's anything fundamentally different, like between the way humans think, animals think, and potentially AI thinks?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So in terms of fundamental differences, that's a difficult question because, one then must ask like difference in what sense, like about what. So you could say there are no major differences in materiality, for example. If you're thinking like, well, do we think that humans, other animals, machines are all made of like roughly the same physical stuff? And then you'd say, no, there's no fundamental difference. But then once we start like narrowing in more on like, well, how is that matter organized and how does it work? Then we start to like see some major differences. I don't know if we'd want to call them fundamental, but major. So for example, like with respect to artificial systems and biological systems, many people point out that the matter, the way it's organized and the way it works is quite different. So on the biological side, you have molecular mechanisms that are dissolved in an aqueous solution and are very stochastic, whereas many machines are not built on those principles. Although you do have some wetware that is based on similar principles that tends to be not the type of machines we're thinking of when we think of computers, and other like large language models are not built on those principles. So those seem to be, quite different. And then when we look at humans and other animals, like comparing to, great apes, cats, dogs, octopuses, we again see similarities in that, for example, the consensus is that we're all shaped in large degree by evolutionary processes, also stochastic processes or genetic drift, but also selection. And so we find things like eyes evolving multiple times. And so we find these similarities in like octopus and humans because of similar evolutionary processes that shaped us. So there are similarities and there are differences. I guess one thing to flag is that in comparative cognition, where I work, where we look at humans and other animals, and then sometimes also AI, but when looking at humans and other animals, the field in the last few decades has found a lot of surprising similarities. So whereas 50 years ago, we would have said that there are some fundamental differences in tool use, social cognition, and physical cognition, it has tended to be the case that the more we study other animals, the more similarities we find. So some people think that maybe, what we've taken to be an absence of evidence is just, evidence of absence has been instead just absence of evidence.
So unfair question. I guess that's your response, which is fair. What I'm hearing is you're saying that there's lots of similarities, there's lots of differences. I'd love to actually talk about that, because one of the things that I first read about the work that you're doing was the AI Animal Olympics, which I thought was really fascinating, and because I was hoping that would help kind of like clarify some of these differences between animal and man and AI. Can you tell me a little bit, give me a little bit of context on what was the AI Olympics and what was your involvement with it?
Yeah, so this was a project that was first, it's still based here, but so we developed it here at the University of Cambridge in collaboration with people at Imperial in London. And so this was part of the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence, which was a new center that was engaged in interdisciplinary work kind of like on the intersection of AI and cognitive science and other areas. But so we were already seeing, when the kind of center started up in 2016, these huge changes in AI capabilities. Many people have heard, in the news about how, all these benchmarks were being reached that we thought might be unreachable, like being able to play chess better than humans, playing Go, shogi, poker, StarCraft. Right. But from a cognitive science perspective, meeting these benchmarks. The benchmarks used in AI are not the same types of benchmarks that are used in cognitive science. So in cognitive science, it's really important when you're testing participants that they did not learn about the task in advance and that they weren't trained on the task. So they're tested on a novel task that they've never encountered before. And the test is designed very carefully in order to probe the participants' cognitive abilities. So for example, their creative problem solving abilities, or their ability to reason about the minds of other agents, so social cognition. But you try to probe that, but in a way where they can't cheat on the task by having studied it in advance,
right.
Or having learned it in some other way. So that's a huge challenge in cognitive science, but researchers have spent a lot of time developing these tasks in order to do that, to avoid the participants cheating on the test inadvertently. And so we thought, it's important that we test AI in the same way. And comparative cognition researchers, those who are studying humans and other animals, are also really well equipped to test kind of alien minds, or minds that are different from humans. And so those were the tests that we collected, put in a virtual environment, and asked people to submit their AI agents to be tested on them. And the tests were secret, so nobody knew when they were submitting their AI agents what the tests would be about. They just knew that they were inspired by cognitive science. We had 300 more tests. There's more being developed. So this was in 2019 when we first launched the competition, and since then we've continued to develop tests. So we have quite a large battery at this point.
Nice. And I think I read from the paper you had, 30 AI agents, 52 children, children aged 6 to 10. And so this was really, and you took sort of, and what I'm understanding you to say is you took sort of standard tests that were being used in animal studies, and you created an environment so they could also be tested with AIs. And it sounds like this happened during the pandemic. So links were sent off. 6 to 10-year-old children were, doing the test. Why, out of curiosity, why did you target, children originally instead of targeting adults?
Yeah, so a few reasons. So the competition where we asked people to submit their AI agents happened before this comparative study. So then we tested children as well to compare how they were doing, how they did compared to the AI agents. But one reason why psychologists do focus on children, I mean, one reason is that adults have a lot of abilities, and so things get quite complicated very quickly, especially linguistic abilities, and so those can sometimes confound results when we're trying to see if children are applying, for example, causal reasoning skills or ability to reason about a causal situation. With adults, they might have, again, encountered that task or have all these other kind of abilities that help them solve it that are different from the ones we're looking for.
So children are ignorant, so it's a lot easier to test them. That's fair.
Yeah, it's like in psychology, they also focus a lot on pre-linguistic infants, which we did not do.
Right.
So that language is not a confounding factor.
Got it. And so what's an example of a test? Like what's a example of a test that, I'm curious, what did AI do well on? What's an example of a test that AI could do that animals and humans could also do?
Yes. So for the comparative study with humans and AI, we grouped the tests according to 10 categories, so ranked according to difficulty. So some tests were very kind of simple from an adult human perspective. So for example, there was a food retrieval task, and that was just, can someone navigate towards a rewarding stimuli and away from an aversive stimuli? So the reward was a green ball and you got points for it. Can you navigate towards or away from that? That's just food retrieval, food being the reward.
Got it. And so this was all within, I noticed using Unity framework. It was sort of a virtual environment. It was a kind of a virtual game environment created using Unity. And so you're saying that for the simple retrieval tasks, it was navigating in this virtual environment. You would compare how children would do it versus how AI would be able to do it. Exactly.
And children were interfacing through a computer. And another example of a simple task was just preferences. So you could have multiple rewards, and would you choose the best reward? So that was, again, a very kind of simple one. And then on the more difficult end, there were tool using tasks, or the need to use non-reward objects in the environment in order to retrieve the reward, or navigate obstacles and things like that. In response to your question about what AI was good at, the agents the AI agents in this study were just good or comparable to children on the simpler tasks. So they were comparable to children when it came to navigating towards and away from a reward and preferences, like choosing the better reward. But when it came to all of the other tasks, then children were outperformed AI.
Yay, human children. So, one thing, I guess the big question that comes away from that is so I've heard that in certain environments, like self-driving cars and things like that, that often when AIs do different things from human, they're completely alien. So they're unexpectedly stupid in certain ways that humans get things right. And so I've always wondered how alien, general AI intelligence is in comparison with humans. Was in your experience from the AI Olympics, was it like that AI was surprisingly good at certain things, but surprisingly stupid at others? Or is it just like AI not like sort of at the stage of development yet where it's even sort of approaching human capability? So we're not even, it's not that it's a different type of intelligence. It's more like it's still in the early, we're not developed enough to have anything that's comparable yet to humans.
Yes, that's right. It was the latter.
Okay.
And it wasn't very surprising because the standard, again, the benchmarks or the goals that are driving the development concern getting good at a task that you've been trained on. And so as soon as you take a system out of that environment and kind of ask it to operate well across a range of tasks that it's never been directly trained on, then, I mean, it wasn't all that surprising that they would struggle. But we were hoping that maybe some of the architectures that were developed or that emerged from general training would have this kind of domain general intelligence where it could successfully perform across a variety of tasks. But at that stage, and we weren't expecting it yet. And that's a goal, though, that many researchers are now trying to achieve. So what people refer to as common sense
Right.
in AI.
That's really interesting. So the real problem that you saw was more like general intelligence, like being able to
Absolutely.
transfer knowledge across domains, and AI is just not there yet. And so that's where it struggled with, where humans have this general intelligence ability that we haven't reached yet with our AI models.
Yes. Specialist intelligence.
Yeah.
AI is arguably better than humans
Yeah.
in many ways, but not general.
Cool. Well, so I wanted to switch topics a little bit because I know there's another project that you're very much involved in the major transitions in the evolution of cognition project. This feels very related to what we were just talking about in terms of like what are the different sort of transition points. Can you tell me a little more about that project?
Yeah. So this is a project that we started a few years ago. This is in collaboration with a neuroethologist, Andrew Barron, who studies bee cognition, and Colin Klein, a philosopher of cognitive science, who looks at a few things, including AI. But so what we've been doing there is, so first of all, we kind of say, okay, we know that animal cognitive abilities or intelligence is incredibly diverse. Our starting point is it's very diverse. Like, and how do we think about this, like this diversity? And kind of traditionally, the space has been carved out in terms of human versus non-human. So someone's like, oh, are you like a human? If you are, then you're intelligent.
Like the Turing test. Yeah. Like where it's a
exactly.
direct comparison. Can you trick another human into thinking you're a human or something like that?
Yes. And that is a form of intelligence, but we also want to acknowledge like other forms of intelligence and just have still a coarse-grained picture where you can kind of look at all of life, but more fine-grained than just human versus not human. And so the major transitions framework is inspired by a theory in the 1990s that was developed by Smith and Slithmari in biology, evolutionary biology, that argued that in biology, we find these major transitions. So for example, you have the transition from unicellular life to multicellular life. And that's huge. Like that's a very important like shift. And one of the reasons why it's important is because once you have multicellular organisms, the kind of game changes in terms of what's possible evolutionarily. Like what's the space of possibilities now for organisms? And so we're adopting that but applying it to cognitive abilities or the ability for information to flow in various ways in an organism and how that affects behavior and behavioral capacities.
So it's not, so just to check my understanding. So it's not just like getting a new capability. It's like a complete shift in what's possible in both the case of life in these transition points in life that you're talking about, and in the case of these major transition points of cognition. It's not like one day get this new ability, now I have a new form of intelligence. It's more like a major architectural change in that allows all sorts of new things to happen. Is that, am I getting
exactly?
Okay.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because sometimes people in the literature do refer to specific capacities, like the ability to build an internal model of the world, which is very important, but as a major transition. But even though it's a very important transition, we wanted to limit the use of the term to things that also affect like downstream evolution. And yeah, maybe I should give a few examples.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, so I won't go through all the transitions that we suggest. We suggest 5 as a starting point, but this is just a starting point. But one major transition is just from no nervous systems to just to nerve nets or networks of neurons. So there are many organisms, including plants, have neurotransmitters in as part of their molecular biology. But something fundamentally shifted when we went to neural networks. Like, first of all, communication was very fast. You gain learning abilities, like the ability to associate simple stimuli, habituation, so the ability to learn over time or get used to something. And so right now we have examples of organisms with just a nerve net or a network, a nervous system architecture that takes the form of a distributed network. And that's like jellyfish, sea anemones have this system. And they can do things like, for example, jellyfish can hunt by orienting towards a stimuli and kind of changing direction as the stimuli changes direction. So it's incredibly useful to have a nervous system like this. And again, you can react more quickly because it takes time for molecules to distribute across a system. But with a nervous system, you can send signals quickly. And okay, so why is this a major transition? Well, evolutionarily, during the Ediacaran period, which is about 600 to 500 million years ago, the world was dominated by these creatures with these simple decentralized nervous systems.
So a bunch of jellyfish.
Yeah,
exactly. Lots of things like jelly. Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just to give one more example, so that's one shift, like no nervous systems to nervous systems. Yes. So just to give one more example, another transition that we identify is between networks and centralization. So here, again, it might seem like a simple, you're just going from a distributed system to one that's more centralized. But when you look at the evolution of life and cognition, it was a huge step. So organisms that have a centralized system today are like the nematode worm, which is studied a lot in science, flatworms,
C. elegans.
Yeah, exactly. C. elegans. But why is this so huge? Well, as soon as you have centralization, so you don't have just a distributed system, you can develop sensors like eyes and limbs. And when this came about evolutionarily, and this is in the Cambrian period, so about 500 million years ago, again, life changed. So the predator-prey dynamics shifted because now you had sophisticated ways of sensing prey, sophisticated ways of evading predators, and it just changed the evolutionary game. Different forms of learning emerged, etc. So yeah, these are just by looking at the history of life, you can see these major shifts in cognitive abilities.
So that's very cool. So you're talking about like sort of maybe simple changes in organisms that over time amounted to big architectural changes. And those architectural changes opened up, like you're talking about, allowed, these jellyfish to hunt when maybe earlier creatures weren't able to do that, or opened up all sorts of new, like coordinated behavior or whatever, or different things at different points because of architectural changes. And so is the right way to think about this is, long time ago, stupid animals, each of these like phases, this is like leveling up in a computer game where now, we have this architectural change. So now they're smarter. And then at the top we get humans. And so we've leveled up to, human level. And so that we can look at that progression. Or is there a better way to think about this?
Yeah, thanks for asking. we would definitely want to avoid the idea of a hierarchy, although it is a nested picture. So you do require a nervous system first to get centralization, and you require centralization to move on to the next transition, which involves recurrence. But that said, I mean, every form of life is different, and you can transition to a new architecture and then lose certain abilities that you had before. So it's not in the sense that everything gets better, whatever that would mean in terms of. So in all cases, you're surviving, and that's
Right.
what evolution is after.
I see. So it sounds like some of the stages are prerequisites for other stages,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily a progression where getting smarter or I don't know, some more ability that you're getting, you're losing stuff at the same time as you're gaining stuff.
Yeah, you could argue that the systems become more complex, but with complexity come limitations. So it's not better in like every sense; it's just different.
Got it. Well, so again, want to switch topics a little bit, because now that we've talked about sort of transitions in cognition, I want to talk about. I loved your paper on AlphaGo. I read that recently. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that, but I also thought it was interesting in terms of this overall discussion, because it gave you an opportunity to talk about like creativity, where this feels like, creativity is one of those things that we think is distinctly human, and stupid AIs won't get it. And, maybe animals might get it occasionally, but it's something that's special about us versus them. And I was curious. Maybe I should give you an opportunity to talk about your sort of reaction to the AlphaGo. Can you give us some background on that, and what were your conclusions about creativity?
So this was a really exciting case that I'm sure many people followed in the news when it first started to occur in 2015, 2016. So in 2015, DeepMind started developing AlphaGo, the kind of first versions, and then kind of shocked the world by it beating the world champion Go player in 2016, Lee Sedol, which many people might have watched that tournament. And why was this so shocking? Several reasons. One reason why it was shocking was first, humans have been playing Go for thousands of years, and not just playing casually.
Right. We should be good at it by now. Yeah. Right.
So dedicating entire lives to perfecting. Not only that, but the professional Go community did think that, given 3,000 years of like studying intensely this game, that they had explored the kind of solution space pretty well and were close to optimal play. So that was kind of the sense. But also, Go is different than chess in that it's this game that's described as involving a lot of intuition and creative intuition, and that it's almost more like art than it's not just brute force calculation where you're, trying to predict where your opponent will go and then like calculating what you would do in response to that. Though that is part of it, it's also like looking at the shapes on the board and like what looks good and what's beautiful, and that's considered important for good play. So for all these reasons, you think that an AI system wouldn't be able to beat a human. But not only did AlphaGo beat the world champion, but it just did things that the professional Go community didn't expect. Like it just played in a radically different way. Was playing, like an alien intelligence in ways that when you watch the game, you're like, well, AlphaGo's going to lose because that's like a bad play, when in fact it won.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I think you say at one point that, we used to use chess as sort of the measure of intelligence, and AI won at chess, but a lot of it was like through brute force and not really a human style of playing. And I thought it was interesting how you talked about, well, with Go, I mean, it was actually much more creative. And so in some ways it's a more interesting, win between AI. Because I remember when it happened, I didn't really pay that much attention because I figured, well, AIs have already beat us at chess, so what's Go? But it sounds like you're saying that the Go case was just really different because it's showing a different type of intelligence that we hadn't seen before.
And one we thought was uniquely human.
Yeah.
And it not only, well, it played in a way that wasn't uniquely human, but that was better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you said, I think there was a quote in your paper too, where you talked about the Go master was like impressed by, the type of moves, how creative they were. So that, and if I remember correctly, I think you said in your paper that you felt that AlphaGo and similar systems were showing one form of creativity, but you also seemed hesitant to fully give them, sort of human-like creativity yet because they were lacking in another area. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So my approach. So I was also just curious about whether AlphaGo should describe it as creative, because sometimes these terms are used and they're meant more in a kind of or they're used in a way that isn't very rigorous, or just as a way of exclaiming or praising the technology. And so similar to the animal AI test bed, like with that kind of hat on, I went into this the question of whether AlphaGo is creative from a cognitive science perspective. And I was like, okay, well, how do we test for creative problem solving in humans and other animals? And does AlphaGo pass like that test, or meet that standard? And so, I mean, the creativity there's a big literature out there, but in terms of how it's tested in comparative cognition, people tend to cite two criteria. One is the ability to simulate or engage in mental scenario building. So this is when, rather than if I run into a problem, I could just bat around, press buttons until I get the reward. And that's one way of solving the problem. It's like trial and error. Or I could look at it and be like, okay, well, there's a lever. If I imagine pressing that lever, it will do this, and then that will move in this direction. And so I'm using my kind of physical causal understanding of the world to simulate what I think will happen. And then I perform the action that I think is best based on that. And that's considered evolutionarily, that's very helpful, because if you think if you're an organism that needs to survive, it's probably better to plan what you're going to do and think and kind of know that it will work, rather than just
randomly do things. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
That are dangerous. And so that's one criterion. And then the other criterion that people tend to point to is this domain general ability, knowledge. So it's not just that I'm understand this part of the world very well, but that I have a kind of, well, you could again say kind of common sense physical knowledge. So I know how gravity works. I know that solid objects can't pass through other solid objects. I know how fluids kind of work in the world, what happens when I spill a glass of water. And so I have this general knowledge of the world that I can then employ when I'm simulating the world and solve problems across various domains with this general knowledge.
So this links back to what you were saying about the animal AI Olympics again. It's
exactly.
Limitation around general intelligence. So you're saying that, AlphaGo showed creativity by creating a model of, the future. So it wasn't just randomly doing stuff. It was coming up with creative solutions. But what you're saying is it's still very limited to playing Go. And we wouldn't expect AlphaGo to be able to go out and play another, related game necessarily. Wouldn't do it well. And definitely wouldn't. If we threw it into the Animal Olympics, AlphaGo would do horrible. Because it's just not designed to be able to be cross-domain. Is that?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So with respect to those two criteria, ability to engage in mental scenario building within the world of a 19 by 19 game of Go, amazing.
Mastered it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But doesn't meet that additional criterion of being able to move across domains. So if we think of creative problem solving as being able to kind of step back and be like, how do I solve this weird like problem that I've never encountered before by drawing on my like general understanding of the world. That's something that it doesn't have, because its general understanding of its understanding of the world in the case of AlphaGo was limited to a standard game of Go. And as soon as you change something, like change a rule of the game, then it wouldn't be able to succeed.
Well, so I guess I'm curious. So it sounds like, AI still pretty weak in terms of like general reasoning ability. It's showing some things that you might consider signs of creativity, at least in limited domains. I'm curious about, so the big question, of course, that people ask is, can AI be conscious in the same way as we assume animals are? At least certain people assume animals. I like to think my dog Bandit is conscious, but in the way animals are, humans are. And I know that you seem sympathetic, at least to some of the ideas that maybe there's a transition point that we can use to mark consciousness. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, so this is some people. So consciousness is a really difficult kind of problem, or saying what it is and how to identify it. But some people argue that so in the spirit of of the major transitions framework we were discussing earlier, that there are some transitions that seem associated with consciousness. So things that are easier to study, like certain learning abilities, seem to overlap with what we take to be necessary for consciousness. So they argue, and the people I'm thinking of here are Eva Jablonka, Simona Ginsberg, and Jonathan Birch has adopted this position, where you have so you have a major transition, and then it comes to completion. So you're kind of at the end of the transition, and the abilities that the organisms have that have been part of that transition, we can also consider to be conscious, because they have all these other abilities that we think kind of overlap with consciousness. And they look at unlimited associative learning, which is a particular form of learning that's very flexible and open-ended. And again, we can study that. We can actually go test unlimited associative learning in various organisms. And if it is a nice proxy for consciousness, then we should just be able to say, oh, you have that, so we can call you conscious.
Got it. So like going back to those transition points we were talking about before, like those big architectural changes, there's some people who are like positing that one of these transition points might correspond to sort of like at least a marker of consciousness. And so we want to say that once it's reached, that once an animal or potentially an AI has an architecture where it can reason in that way, that we might that might be good reason to start calling that organism conscious. And just to clarify, do you think, I think, animals, I know there's a lot of debates about are bees conscious? Is C. elegans conscious? And some people just deny consciousness to everything except for humans. So I know it's very hard in the case of even, sort of animal life to get agreement on what animals count as conscious. Do you think that this will help kind of like, even with animals, help people make decisions if there's some sort of like, I don't know, if we're looking at a certain architecture that's distinctive, do you think it will help settle some of those questions? Or does it just, I don't know, we don't know? Because the problem of consciousness is it's always hard. There's no self-reporting on consciousness from animals. And so it's very hard to figure out, whether we've marked out the right stuff. So I guess I'm not sure how to think about that.
Yes, you're not alone. Most people are not sure how to think about this, because it is a tough question. It's a tough area, but one in which there are more and more people working on consciousness in animals and concerned about AI consciousness. So I think there's more empirical work and theoretical work going into it. But in terms of transitions and markers of consciousness, I guess I'm skeptical that there will be a neat overlap. And I'm also, okay, so the animal AI testbed does look just at behavior. So behaviors are very important and are important indicators of underlying cognitive abilities. But ideally, you also understand the underlying mechanisms to some degree, whether on a kind of cognitive or even neural level. And with consciousness, there's so much disagreement about what it involves that there are, there are some like broad things that people can agree on in terms of like some of the empirical work that, but there is no agreement about any theories of consciousness or how consciousness operates in the human case. And I think that makes it a really difficult to rely on any kind of markers. At least we have to be open to revising those markers at all times as our knowledge improves.
So are you skeptical about the whole project of ever coming up with sort of architectural markers for consciousness? Or is it more like you're saying, this is a really hard problem, we're not going to solve this in the next couple of years? Or is it just sort of like like even theoretically, it's not something, because I know, there's people like Daniel Dennett who just say, look, consciousness doesn't really exist in the ways that we're talking about, and maybe we should just drop it from talk of science, and maybe it's just as good scientists we should just focus on on stuff that we can measure and we can understand. It sounds like you're not really necessarily in that camp. I don't know, I'm curious what you think about that.
I am I guess I'm optimistic that we will understand it better over time, but we're just not at that stage currently. And the way to understand consciousness, I mean, a starting point is to just do studies so currently, for example, we rely a lot on studies of humans where they say, oh, I was conscious of that, and I was not aware of that. And that's a starting point, because then you can start to track, okay, so what was going on when you say you were conscious and what was going on when you say you weren't. And then we can adapt those methods to behavioral non-linguistic indicators as well. So like how an animal behaves when it seems to be unaware of something versus aware of something. And so I think starting there and working from that foundation of empirical work is the way to go. And again, there are some promising accounts out there. And it's a really important question. Like, we do want to know what animals are conscious. It has
huge ethical implications. Exactly. I know. Yeah, the question of I don't know, how bad should I feel when I killed the cockroaches in my kitchen, or I mean, are they conscious or not? Should I feel bad about it? I don't know. I mean, which raises the question. I guess that the other question I want to ask you is, like, it seems like there's no theoretical barrier to talking about AI being conscious at a certain point. If it's just an architectural change, if it's just a transition point, is that right? Do you think there's a future point, I don't know, ChatGPT 12, say, where it could, at least theoretically, we could be interacting with a conscious agent?
Yes. So in terms of fundamental differences, yes, I don't think there's anything that suggests it's fundamentally impossible for an artificial system to be conscious, especially because we know so little about what's required for consciousness. And that's what makes a lot of people nervous. It's like how, these technologies are advancing, but if we don't know exactly what is required for a system to be conscious, we might be creating conscious systems now.
So it seems like a really important question to try to figure that out. I mean, sort of our ethics of interacting with AI in the same way, because I guess another sort of related question, and you talk a little bit about this, is this sort of, gradualism perspective, where instead of, because I think sometimes when people talk about consciousness, they think one fine day you'll be completely conscious, and then, whoops, the lights turned on, now is conscious. But I think at certain points I read, you were talking about, like, there's also a perspective where it might be more gradual. And I don't know whether like bees are as conscious as humans or conscious in different ways. Could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, so even though some might think that there might be a like lights turn on phenomenon where consciousness is understood as any mental state that has an experiential quality, like anytime you feel something, feel a table, feel something, burn your hand or what. So yeah, any kind of experience. So that's what I'm thinking of. The word consciousness, sometimes sentience is used to refer to this, or subjective experience, and consciousness is a more full-blown ability of self-awareness and other things. But just with that basic ability to experience something, or having like your mental states have an experiential component, it could be that there's a point in which evolutionarily, for example, some animals just have that, but you don't have to have human-like experience in order to reach that point. So there could be something, it's like to be a bee,
Right.
that's very different. Maybe it's just like feeling, pain in some ways, maybe a different range of pains than humans feel, or different sense of one's body, or sense of the world when navigating. Yeah, so I think one just should be careful to think that what it means to be conscious is to have like the same profile that humans have. You can have many, many different profiles, but it might still have ethical implications insofar as, so if we think of consciousness as just the ability to feel things, and then feeling things includes feeling good or bad things,
Right.
then it already has ethical consequences, even if it's like comes in a different form than humans.
So interesting. So you think it's possible that over time, as each new ChatGPT version comes out, it might start developing consciousness. It might be very different though from human. It might be more like insect consciousness, or more like, I don't know, or very alien types of consciousness. But at a certain point, we still have to, in the same way as we're starting to worry much more as we should about, animal ethics, about animal consciousness, we'll have to start taking into our considerations AI consciousness too.
Yes, I think we should now already, and I think some people are doing so. One thing to note, though, about large language models is that, so when we were talking about the animal AI testbed, the purpose was to ensure, of developing that testbed was to ensure that when testing AI, we're testing them on data or like problems that weren't part of their training, so they can't cheat on the test in that sense. Having already know how to solve it, or memorized how to solve it. When it comes to large language models, they are trained on a vast amount of human information. So there have been attempts to test large language models on cognitive tests, but the problem is it's incredibly difficult to eliminate the possibility that they just read about it.
Right.
So for example, there's a theory of mind task that it's this classic kind of Sally Ann task. So if you just gave them that task and they passed it with flying colors, some might say, oh, they have this very sophisticated ability called theory of mind. But they, in their training set, are papers and blog posts and various discussions of this task. And so, yeah, it's with large language models, I think they might pass all of our tests or meet all of our criteria for consciousness, but not be conscious because they have access to those criteria and tests.
They're cheating. They're cheating massively.
They have the possibility to. So it's hard to, whereas a bee, for example, doesn't know in advance. I mean, well, we try to design tests where they can't pass it unless they have the ability we're testing for. And we kind of look to see that, yeah, they can't cheat in that way. And they don't have access to our scientific literature.
So how do you suggest, so people viewing this podcast, what's the best way to learn more about this? How would you dive into this? Are there books you recommend, resources? What's the best way to sort of, stay up on this stuff?
Yeah, Yeah, thanks. I think there are many places to go. If you're interested in some of the research that we're doing, if you go to the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence website, there's a program there called Kinds of Intelligence, and that's where a lot of the research that we've been talking about today is
Oh, nice.
taking
I'll
place,
put a link
including
in the description to it.
Oh, great.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thanks. And then I guess another thing that I've been involved in is there's been a Diverse Intelligences initiative funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation. And there's a lot of research on, again, diverse intelligences there, looking at humans, animals, AI.
Awesome. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Just thank you. This has been a really fascinating discussion. And yeah, I look forward to future podcasts on these topics.
Awesome. Well, hey, I super appreciate your time today. This was really fascinating. Thank you for your time. And yeah.
Thank you for joining us for the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity. Please remember to subscribe to ensure that you receive future episodes.